Well, Katy, thank you for coming.
It's always a joy when I get to be on the Strong Women podcast. I'm such a big fan.
Yes, and I love that you said it's always, because this is like your, 10th time. I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
I don't even know
veteran.
how many times. Yeah, you're a veteran guest, so I appreciate
I
you.
accept. It's a badge of honor.
Yes. I'm glad you accepted. Okay, we're going to jump right in because I've got some big questions that I'm assuming our listeners also have. And it's all around in vitro fertilization and reproductive technology sort of things. Okay. Mm-hmm. So often when something is legal or doable, it takes us a while to start asking the right questions, doesn't it? We kind of go, oh, well, this is great. Especially when it comes to in vitro fertilization, because so many women have struggled with fertility that it's like, okay, this is the answer. But listeners, I want you to know that this is going to be a hard conversation, but I want you to stick with us because as Christians in this current moment, it is so important for us to dive into these hard topics and really just put them on the table and say, how can we view this from a biblical framework, from what fits with reality, with God's reality? And so that's what we're doing today, you guys, with Katy. So Katy, I'm putting it on the table. In vitro fertilization.
Okay.
Go.
Okay, great. So I look at this from two different perspectives. The first one is I have been a pastor's wife and doing ministry with my husband for about 30 years. We've had a lot of close contact with people that have wanted to get pregnant, that can't get pregnant, that have medical issues, that desperately want to have a baby. I used to work at the largest Chinese adoption agency in the world. There were a lot of people there that were turning to adoption because they had dealt with fertility issues. And I remember, and I have walked very closely with women that all they want, the only thing they want, the only thing they can think about is what is the pregnancy test going to say this month? Mm-hmm. And then the hopes rise, and then they crash, and then they repeat. And it is a crushing load that especially women have to deal with when they are wrestling through that God-given desire to be a mom. And they want it for the right reasons. And they want it for wonderful motives because they're doing what they feel like God has wired them to do. And for women especially, I mean, men definitely struggle with this too, but it is something that women especially are burdened by. We need to have high levels of empathy, high levels of compassion. And I would say get them real solutions for that don't involve circumventing their health, but rather identifying and healing whatever might be getting in the way of them conceiving on their own. Mm-hmm. So from a pastoral perspective, that is sort of my lens. But then I also have this other perspective, and it is a mandate from God to protect children. And that's not just a mandate that I have. That is actually a pure manifestation of the undefiled religion before God that every Christian must express. There is something about Christianity that goes hand in hand with child protection. So I don't look primarily at IVF through the lens of how can I help my friends get pregnant, or how can you have the child that you want even though you're dealing with infertility. The bigger question, especially if you consider yourself to be a Christian, is how do we protect children from an industry that demonstrably victimizes the vast majority of the kids that they are creating in vitro, in glass. So that is where I'm going to be coming from probably in the bulk of this conversation, because there's lots and lots of voices, especially in the church, validating and affirming and encouraging people to go down the IVF route. I hopefully am going to do what I feel like God has called me to do, and that is say, no, we need to put a firewall around the rights of children and defend them, even if it means that some adults might have to sacrifice to do so.
Okay, so break this down for us, because this is an assumed good in our society, this sort of technology. And, I imagine some of our listeners are like, wait a second, why is this not good? So break it down for us.
Okay, so we think, well, this is good because We know children that have been born through IVF. Maybe some of the listeners have children that were born through IVF. All of those lives are precious. All of those children are distinct humans that have a right to life. They have a right to their mother and father. They have a right to be born free and not bought and sold. And those little kids, like the littlest of the kids, the ones that are just created, that are just days old, that are in the petri dish, that are in the process of cell division and replication, those are the earliest stages of human beings. And I think most of the listeners are going to understand that's a baby. Mm-hmm. That's a baby from the moment of conception. So here is the problem. IVF encourages parents to not create one baby or even two babies. They say create as many babies as possible. Why? Because IVF has pretty high failure rates, especially the older that you get. The more you age, the harder it is to extract eggs that are viable, have those eggs be fertilized successfully, freeze them, thaw them, implant them, and carry them to term. And so what your clinic is going to advise you to do is to create as many embryos as possible. Maybe that's 10, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 30. And why is it that they need that many embryos? Number one, because there is high failure rates when it comes to all those different processes of fertilization, freezing, thawing, implantation, and then making it all the way until delivery. But also because they are going to encourage parents to screen the children. All of those little babies, all of the embryos, are going to get a grade between A, B, C, and D. They literally grade the quality of the life. They will encourage you to discard the C and D embryos. They will encourage you to transfer one or two, maybe, of the A grade embryos. The remaining A grade embryos or B grade embryos, they will probably encourage you to freeze. But there's other things that they're going to do beyond the grading. They're going to do all kinds of genetic testing so they can screen out anything that looks like it might be a genetic concern. Obviously, things like Down syndrome or trisomy or whatever. But there's also boutique clinics that offer a whole palette of screening criteria, from things like eye color to future baldness to possibility of blindness. And of course, they'll screen out, and by screen out, we mean discard as medical waste, the babies that don't make the grade and that have some kind of genetic predisposition, not guarantee, to high blood pressure or heart disease later on in life. 73% of clinics allow you to select the sex of your embryo. I just tweeted out an article this morning that said, clinics allow you to choose the gender of your child. And I said, here's the correct way of saying that. Clinics allow you to destroy the embryos that are the wrong gender. So they're not making babies of the gender you want. They're making multiple embryos, and they're destroying all of the embryos that are not the grade that you want, the genetic fitness that you want, and the gender that you want. That is why you need 15 embryos, because you're going to end up with about 5 that meet your specifications. So when you look at all of the different processes that the babies have to go through from the time they are made in vitro, in glass, to the time when the babies are actually born, what you see is there's about 3% of lab-made babies that are going to be born alive. The vast majority will not make it through the screening, the freezing, the thawing, the implantation process. Most of them will be destroyed.
So what I'm hearing you say is a lot, but one of the things that's standing out that I want to make sure we catch is that language really matters. And these tidy words of discard or whatever, what they think about these words as you're reading articles or listening to doctors who are giving you advice. Really get underneath those words. What are they actually saying, and what does it imply about this little life? Okay, so in your opinion, is there a way to do fertility technology ethically?
So when you are asking about ethics, you're appealing to a specific authority, right? What authority are you looking to determine whether or not this is ethical? So if you're Catholic, you would have to look at the authority of the church, which has said no. There's no way to do this. If you look at some Protestant denominations, like the Missouri Synod, Lutherans, the Southern Baptists just condemned IVF. especially the mass destruction of embryos through IVF, you have to look at those spiritual authorities and go, the church has said this doesn't sound like a good idea. If you look at bioethicists, many of them would say that anytime you're manufacturing life rather than begetting life, you have crossed a line. There's some Christian theologians that will say anytime you're separating the iron triad of sex, babies, and marriage, you are outside of God's will, and that's what IVF does. It separates babies from sex. But I will answer that question from the perspective of children's rights. If we are going to honor children's right to life and right to their mother and father, there is a very narrow pathway where you could create a baby without violating either of those rights. That means only the gametes of the mother and father that will take the baby home. No screening, no sex selection, no freezing, because once the baby goes in the freezer, very often the babies never come out. That is why we have 1 million to perhaps 10 million frozen children on ice in this country. We have frozen orphanages scattered all across the nation. Because a lot of those people thought, I'm going to freeze them and go back for them. But then they got twins on the first round when they were 43. And then they were exhausted because twins are exhausting. And so is parenting in your 40s.
Yeah.
And then they get to the point when, they're actually now 47 or 48. And now they're way beyond the geriatric pregnancy. And she can't carry the pregnancy to term safely. But they still have 4 children in the freezer, and they agonize and lay awake every night wondering, what are we going to do? Because those are just as much our children as the 2 kids we just dropped off at kindergarten, earlier today.
Yeah.
So no freezing of children. Only implant them immediately. So that scenario that I just described is virtually never done. Because it's too cost prohibitive, and you will fight your own fertility doctor to do it that way. One of the very few things that fertility clinics have to report is their live birth rates, and their live birth rates are tanked if you choose to use a subpar embryo. If you don't put in the grade A or the grade B, then the child may not thrive, they may not make it to live birth, and then you are tanking the clinic's reputation. So they will discourage you from conducting IVF in a way that honors children's, especially right to life. They don't care about their right to their mother and father either, but it's the live birth rates they care about. So I've now spoken to thousands of people across the country. Everybody asks me, is there a way? Everybody wants to do IVF. Most people in our world want to do it in a way that doesn't victimize children. So everybody says, is there a way I can do this with a clean conscience?
Right.
And I described that very, very narrow pathway. And out of the thousands of people I've talked to, I've met 5 people who said, that's what I did. I created only the number of embryos. We immediately implanted. We didn't sex select. We didn't screen out any babies. And we've got 1 or 2. And all 5 of them were absolutely loaded. They had money coming out of their ears because it's too cost prohibitive to do what I just described for the vast majority of people.
Okay, that's a hard thing to hear, but that's what I mean. You guys, let's pull it out on the table. Let's think about this from a biblical framework and the reality of where life comes from and all of that. Okay, so let's talk about 2 different scenarios. I'm going to start with this one first. Let's say that there is a couple out there who's listening, and they're thinking, they've either just started thinking about this, or they're like, oh no, what do I do? Because I have embryo frozen. What can you guide them at all?
Yeah. If you are at the place where you've been diagnosed with infertility or you're struggling to get pregnant, there's a really good chance that you have what they call unexplained infertility. And if you're honest, or if your doctor was honest with you, that's actually probably unexplored infertility or undiagnosed infertility, because they really have not done the diagnostics needed to figure out why is it that you're not able to achieve pregnancy on your own, especially if you are in your 20s or early 30s. If you're over 35, if you're in your early 40s, that's not infertility. That's typically you've just missed your prime reproductive windows, and this is your body operating the way human female bodies typically do. But if you're younger and you've been struggling to get pregnant, they're probably going to rush you into the IVF pipeline, because there's so much money to be made there. But there's other alternatives. There's alternatives that involve accurately diagnosing what could be one of a dozen different struggles or challenges that your body is needing to overcome before you can get pregnant on your own. So if that is you, you need to Google something called restorative reproductive medicine. Restorative reproductive medicine. You can also look up NAPRO, NAPRO technology, natural procreative technologies. Now, what do these two systems of medicine seek to achieve? They will do the diagnostic. They will look at you, they will look at your husband, they will see where is the problem here for two young, healthy people that should be able to achieve pregnancy. Very often there is a problem that they can treat, endometriosis, they can adjust your hormone levels. Maybe there's, a lot of women need to lose 20 pounds because a lot of times obesity is a main factor in infertility challenges. There's a lot of things that you can control that can get you to the place where you can achieve pregnancy without the help of a technician or without going into debt to the tune of $20,000 or $30,000. So go to the people that can help you heal your body and get pregnant on your own. I know so many people who were told you're infertile. And then they went to a restorative reproductive medicine doctor, and within a couple months or a year, they were pregnant. So work with your body whenever possible. The second scenario of you're listening to this and you have the babies that are either born to you through IVF and you understand how precious and wonderful they are. And then maybe you still have children in frozen storage because you didn't know. And they told you that you needed to do this. And you're not sure what to do. Well, you need to do the hard thing, which is what we expect people in an unplanned pregnancy to do. If we're pro-life and you know a woman that is in a crisis pregnancy or an unplanned pregnancy, we tell her the child shouldn't lose their right to life because this was an unplanned pregnancy. We say you and the father of your child need to conform your decisions and your life so the child's right to life is protected and the right to their mother and father is protected. It is the same answer with a very planned pregnancy. If you made the baby, it is your job to conform your life and your choices to the needs of the baby. You need to go get them. You need to implant them. Maybe you will go into debt. Maybe you will need to buy a van. Maybe you will need to have your mother move in and help you. But you made the babies. You need to raise the babies. Go get them.
Wow. Okay. I'd never heard of this restorative reproductive medicine, but yeah, there's so many things that just go unaddressed or unnoticed. So that is such a good resource. I'm glad that you had that. And the next thing I wanted to talk about is, next on this episode is we're going to tell a story. So that's a sneak peek, you guys, of a woman named Kelsey, and she and her husband were infertile, and they ended up adopting snowflake babies. And so, just help us think about first of all, tell us what that is, and help us to think through that. Is that a route?
Yeah. So let's just talk about all of these frozen children in storage. We don't know how many. The safe estimate is 1 million. The wildly high estimate is 10 million. It's probably somewhere in between, but we don't know because big fertility doesn't have any incentive or requirement for sharing that information with us. But we know that some clinics report that 20 to 40% of the embryos that are in their clinic have been abandoned. There's nobody paying the storage fee. The parents have died. They can't contact them anymore. So what do you do? What do you do with these surplus children? Well, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, which is sort of the big fertility medical authority, says there's 3 different options for what to do with these surplus babies. You can thaw and discard them. You can donate them to research, which means that they will probably be allowed to develop for about 14 days, maybe 21 days, and then they'll be experimented on, ironically, to try to improve fertility treatments in the future, and then they'll be destroyed. Or you can donate them to another couple. So all 3 of those violate the rights of children, violate their right to life, violate their right to their mother and father, treat them as a commodity. So there is one other option. Well, and like I said, what is the real solution for surplus embryos is implant them. Go get them. They are your children, just as much as the ones that are snacking on Cheerios at your breakfast table. They are your children. But in those cases where nobody is available, the parents have died, they're now in their 80s, because some of these children are 30 years old. What do you do then? Well, in those situations, in the very rare case where there is no other option, embryo adoption is a possibility. But that's not embryo donation. We're not donating these children as if they are a used couch. We are adopting them. We are going through the process of bringing them into our family just as a traditional adoptive family would. You are undergoing background checks. You are working to keep sibling groups together. You will, whenever possible, have an open relationship with the child's biological parents so they can have access to their biological identity. But even then, there is going to be some loss and some setbacks. And I say this as a traditional adoptive mom and somebody who was the former assistant director of the largest Chinese adoption agency in the world. Adoption is redemptive, but it also doesn't fully compensate for everything that the child has lost. So we need to go into this mindset. We need to approach this not as a means of, this is a way to complete my family, this is a way to solve my infertility. We need to go into embryo adoption the same way you go into traditional adoption, which is that child is burdened, they've experienced loss. I'm getting into this relationship because I'm going to try to mend the loss and bear their burden. But it's not about me, it's about them.
That's good. And that's a helpful framework of, we're still the questions to ask and the attitude to come at it with. Anything else, Katy, before we close today?
Simply that there's a lot of questions that we have in the marriage, family, and reproductive space. Whether you're talking about being in a marriage that's struggling, whether you're talking about infertility, whether you're talking about same-sex attraction or unwanted singleness, all of these different issues really can be simplified down to one core metric that will help you decide whether or not what you're doing is good or bad, right or wrong, just or unjust. And it is simply this: who is doing the hard thing? If the adults are doing the hard thing so that children do not have to, it is good, it is biblical, it is just. If the adults are forcing children to do hard things, lose their right to life, lose their mother or father through those processes or those decisions, it is bad, it is unjust, it is unbiblical. And so almost all of what happens in the world of big fertility is forcing kids to sacrifice for adults. There may be a few cases here and there, some embryo adoption, maybe some forms, maybe some uses of IVF that don't force kids to sacrifice for adults. But the whole industry itself is bent on destroying children. Literally, big fertility, the baby making industry, by our best estimate, destroys 4 times the number of children every year than the baby taking industry of abortion. So these are child victimizing processes. That is the vast majority of what's taking place in the world of IVF, and it is what is going to be encouraged and almost mandated by the fertility clinic. So we cannot participate, Christians. We, Christians, are charged with child protection. We are warned by our Lord that if anybody would cause little ones to stumble, we will have to answer to him, and he has, not my words, his, devised cruel and unusual punishment if we choose to make kids stumble because there's something that we want. So even though I know this is challenging, there are just bright lines that Christians cannot cross, and making children sacrifice for us is one of those lines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I hope that listeners, I hope this conversation has helped you kind of think through this issue, but also helped you have the language to talk about it with your friends. Because I don't know about you, but I've found myself in conversations where I'm really surprised that people haven't thought about some of the things that they're bringing up. And so then it's like I'm on the spot, here we go. Let's talk about this in a compassionate and winsome way. But with sticking with those big categories, how does this fit? How does it align with truth and reality? And so I hope that you guys find yourself in some conversations that have to talk about this. And so Katy, thank you so much for coming on again. And I'm sure we'll have you back again.
I love it. Thanks for letting me speak into what I know is a hyper personal issue for so many people that are listening. But this is an area where Christians, in my opinion, need to be the most informed because there is so much child protection that needs to take place, and it's the church that does that best.
Yes, so true. So other than those two resources you gave us earlier, the NAPRO, is that what you said? Which is, say what that stands for again?
Natural Procreative Technologies,
Okay.
and that is kind of under the umbrella of restorative reproductive medicine. Those are great, and you know what? Based on the issue it's treating, they can often have much higher success rates than IVF. So just don't let people like steal your health and steal your own fertility from you in the name of unexplained infertility. Like go to a doctor that's really going to figure out what's going on and heal you so you can get pregnant on your own.
Yeah, I love that. I love that we have this resource because actually now that we find ourselves in these conversations, we can say that. We can tell people and point people in the right direction. So that's good. And then, but other than that, where can we get informed? Them Before Us?
Well, yeah, I think we did like 50 interviews or articles about IVF last year. It was like the big thing that we were talking about. If you Google Them Before Us and IVF or Katy Faust IVF, you're going to have hours and hours and hours of interviews to listen to or articles to read. We would love to be, I think we have an IVF fast fact sheet on our website, thembeforeus.com. If you go to thembeforeus.com and you Google IVF harms to children, if you search that, you're going to get like a 5 or 6 page document with everything that we know about the risks of IVF to children, not just their right to life, not just their right to their mother and father, but increased risk of cancer and developmental disabilities and preterm birth. Like even if the child survives IVF, there very often are higher rates and higher risks that the child is going to be subjected to. So it's something that deserves a lot of examination, and especially if you're in that spot of figuring out whether or not to do it, you need a lot of education, and your fertility doctor is not going to give it to you.
Yeah, so good. Okay, well, thanks, Katy.
Okay, thank you.